Chapter 14, Learning to be Human Again. I cannot remember when I left, but I got home late in the afternoon of the same day. Driving home, I had realized that I did not know how to tell my family, my colleagues, about the extra days away from home and work. What could I possibly say? I said nothing. After a few days, absorbed again in my world, in all of my various realities, the Lord of the great ocean became so strange, so absurdly alien to the way of thinking around me that I could hardly remember what I had experienced, let alone talk about my experiences of those days in Village 3. My feelings those first few weeks were hidden. I thought I had to hide them. I did not know how to share what had happened. I kept a sort of inner glow, fortunately, and at night in my dreams I experienced again the wonders of that evening. What exactly would I learn? What was Amid anyway? I did not have a word for him. Shaman is what I now call what Amid was. At the time, I could think of him only as a person who was wise, perhaps even psychic. I knew Amid was not anything like the Malay Bomas I had been working with, but he obviously had some kind of power. It would be quite a few years before Carlos Castaneda would publish first one and then a series of books to popularize the idea of shamans. In 1962, I was superficially familiar with some of the anthropological studies on the subject. The word shaman comes from Siberia, the text said, and was used for those who were intermediaries between this world and the spirit world. Shamans were people who healed, who dressed in outrageous costumes and did a sort of trance dance and took toxic substances. I knew that non-Western peoples around the world had gifted healers and priests with strange powers, but I had no idea what they did. I grew up in two cultures, more than two in fact. I had learned 2 or 3 languages when I first began to talk, and knew well that you spoke one language to one person and another language to another, and that it was sometimes very difficult, if not impossible, to translate what could be said in one language into another. I was now beginning to realize that the differences among peoples is not a difference of language, but rather of how they experience what is real. That is what is important. At that time, I also thought that spiritual meant religious. I knew vaguely that there were people with special qualities, obviously powerful people, but did not think much about them because they did not fit into my worldview as a Westerner and a scientist. I remember a strange thing that had happened when I was maybe 10 or 11 years old. My father had taken me to the opening of a clinic somewhere in the mountains of Sumatra, where a Tibetan, well, he might have been from Nepal or India, but he was called a Tibetan, did tricks, as my father said. The Tibetan levitated. We all saw that. My father and a few other doctors present looked this way and that, bent over to look under his feet, and discussed what was going on. But on the way back, when I asked my father about it, he used words such as illusion and mass hysteria, as if it had all been in our imagination, as if to say, do not pay any attention to such things, son. That is when I learned to be very distrustful of the inexplicable things people did. After the evening when Amid introduced the Lord of the Great Ocean, however, I remained curious about his descriptions of the ocean. How did he know? How could he know? As happens to people who grow up in 2 very different worlds, I learned early to be in 2 different realities. Now at work or at home with my family, the Lord of the Great Ocean became a story that I did not know what to do with. I tried not to think about it. Amid was simply a charming friend who had accompanied me to Port Dixon. The idea of learning to be whatever he was did not have much reality in my daily life. But there were other moments, other realities, when Amid and what he told us of the Lord of the Great Ocean were only too real, and I wanted to be a part of that reality. I yearned to be able to know. One time I told the story of the Lord of the Great Ocean to a colleague, someone who I thought had an interest in anthropological material. His interest turned out to be a critique of my methods of field work and my linguistic interpretations of Malay and Signoi, neither of which he could speak as well as I. I saw clearly, perhaps for the first time, that most people, even scientists, can see the world only from one point of view, their own. I went to the library and read what I could find on shamans, healers, and seers. Most books seemed vague, not very specific. A few accounts mentioned substances that made a shaman enter into a trance. This was before the drug culture, before hallucinogens such as LSD and mescaline were talked about and occasionally ingested, though rarely studied. I knew that what had happened in the little hut in 3 had nothing to do with mysterious substances. There was no mystery in Damar. Eventually, I went back to 3. Maybe, I thought as I was driving up, it did not happen. Oh, yes, when Amid talked about the Lord of the Great Ocean, that really happened. I was certain of that. But I must have imagined talk about learning. Learning what? He did not even have a name for it. As a scientist, I knew that naming is the first step, and sometimes the last one, to understanding. When named, we have pigeonholed something, and we think we understand it. Amid was friendly. All the people in 3 were friendly. They had always been friendly. There were few people that time. I had learned to accept fluctuations in the size of settlements. People were often gone while others came visiting, and one never knew what to expect. We all smiled a great deal, but not a word was said about the Lord of the Great Ocean, or about what had happened the day after Amid's revelation. In the evening, as we sat around comfortably and cozily, not saying much, Amid asked me whether I wanted to walk with him the next day. He said it very innocently and casually, making it easy for me to reject or accept. Yes, that would be fine, I said, equally casually. Early the next morning, before the dew had evaporated, we set off. Amid did not seem to have made any preparations. He did not carry anything, so neither did I. I had a few things with me, but left them in 3. We walked. Neither of us said anything for long periods of time. As the day progressed, I became hot and sweaty, then thirsty, then hungry. We stopped a few times, sitting on a log or a rock. No mention was made of food or drink until I told him I was very thirsty. He looked at me with a sort of grin on his face and said, "Yes, white people sweat a lot." He did not sweat at all, it seemed. Nothing was said about finding water. As we walked on, I began to have visions of a coconut tree, climbing and asking him to climb the tree to get a coconut, opening it. But we did not carry a prong, and I knew in any case there were no coconut trees in the jungle. Finally, I asked him to find me something to drink. I was too thirsty. He stopped and cut a little hole in a vine with his thumbnail. I drank the water. It tasted sort of green, but it was clear and clean. We walked back into 3 an hour or so before the sun went down. I wondered whether his aimless, silent walking would help me learn, whatever it was. Some people had cooked rice that evening. The people do not always eat rice, nor do they always eat together. Often, each person scrounges something to eat during the day. In the evening, there is a very sweet tea and not much to eat. There were some vegetables that had been cooked with the rice and some fried and some dried fish. I ate heartily. I was hungry and thirsty. After my second cup of tea, Amid leaned over and took the cup away from me. We walk tomorrow. Better you not drink. Remembering the vine and the green tasting water, I assented readily enough. I agreed to walk the next day. It was enjoyable. I saw things in the jungle that I had not seen before. There was a sense of adventure, of exploring. The second day went much as the first. We walked. We rested a few times, but did not eat or drink. I again became tired, thirsty, and hungry, but I admit not as thirsty or hungry as the day before. Amid did not volunteer any information. He did not teach. When I asked him something, he barely answered, just grunted something. We walked all day. In the evening, back at 3, I asked him what I should learn from these walks. He laughed loudly, which was unusual for him. No, I am serious, I protested. I need to know what it is I should learn. He chuckled and said, It does not matter. You do not have to understand. You learn. I felt abashed. I did not understand his method of teaching. I thought about it all evening and probably in my sleep as well. In the morning, I woke up with the realization that we Westerners are so used to thinking of training, learning, and teaching as verbal activities that we forget that much, perhaps most, learning happens without verbal instruction. Unfortunately, I could not stay another day. I had to get back to work, back to my family. I promised Amid I would return as soon as I could and would make arrangements to stay longer. He looked at me with a smile that said, You people are so strange with your incomprehensible customs, with your thinking and planning. Do what you must do. The next time I could come, I stayed several days. I came prepared to learn without verbal instruction. I felt free, curious, ready for whatever I would learn. I had told myself I did not even need to understand what it was I was supposed to learn. We walked. I learned to go without water and food for 7 or 8 hours and felt good about myself. Amid never volunteered information. He was friendly. He smiled, but did not say much. He did not even answer questions. In the evenings, I found I had nothing to say. We ate silently. I fell asleep soon after. On the third day, a sort of uneasiness crept up on me. I was beginning to think of my obligations at home and at work. If I did not learn something here, I was wasting my time. I thought I was getting to know what the jungle looked like. I recognized plants, trees, smells, and small sounds from previous walks. I do not think we walked the same paths. In fact, most of the time there were no paths to follow, but Amid seemed to know where he was going, so I followed in his footsteps. Yes, I definitely was beginning to feel I was wasting my time. I could not take this much time from my work and my family. I had to do something, and soon. When we were resting at the end of the morning, I looked at Amid and asked him what he thought of me. Was I learning? He looked at me with astonishment. How could he know? Only I could know that. I told him I did not feel any different. In fact, I told him I did not get it at all. I did not understand what it was I was doing here. I was not learning anything. Please tell me, I almost begged. He looked away. We resumed our walk, which to me had become hard, tired, boring work. I was thinking about what I would be doing tomorrow, what I would have to do, in fact, to catch up on things I was supposed to have done already today. There was a meeting I must attend. Oh, and I had forgotten to write my part of a report, which had been due yesterday, and when we came back that evening, I felt discouraged. The promise of learning to be whatever Amid was not being fulfilled. I was not learning anything. I felt confused, distracted, angry. Back in the city, my work did not go well. Nothing seemed to go smoothly. I became ill with a skin disorder, which doctors diagnosed variously as a rash, some kind of dermatitis, a nonspecific this, and a localized that. They did tests and then gave me cortisone. Nobody told me to taper off the cortisone, so when I stopped the first course, I became sicker. One of the doctors came up with a diagnosis of autoimmune reaction. I asked what I might be reacting to. He said, "Frankly, I do not know. Autoimmune essentially means you are allergic to yourself. As to why, I could not say. Only you will know that." There it was again. Only I could know. Why did they not take responsibility for my health? I thought angrily. I put my trust in doctors, just as I had sheepishly followed Hamid, trusting him to do whatever it was he was supposed to do. And all they could do was throw it back in my face, saying that only I could know. I was beginning to curse the day I had taken Hamid with me to Port Dixon, and the day I had attended that wonderful performance of his. That is all it was, after all, I thought to myself with a sneer. A performance. Everything felt stuck. I felt miserable and lost. I itched. One of the doctors suggested therapy. "What kind of therapy?" I asked. "Oh," he said breezily, "maybe you should go see Dr. So-and-so, a psychiatrist." That shocked me. Was that the kind of sickness I had? My crisis somehow came to an end, or more accurately, it faded very slowly. The rash, or whatever it was, eventually disappeared. I went back to work. I picked up some reading that I had neglected during the days, or was it weeks? I had felt sorry for myself, itching in an air-conditioned bedroom. During moments when I was honest with myself, I knew that nothing had changed. I was as confused as before. I was still blocked. I vaguely felt there was something I had to learn from those aborigines, but what it was I did not know. And what was worse, I did not know how to go about learning to learn whatever it was I had to learn. A long time passed before I could finally go back to 3. I was almost hoping that Hamid would not be there. Maybe none of the people I knew would be there, and I would not have to explain why I had not come back sooner and earlier. They were all there. Hamid seemed genuinely happy to see me. Nobody asked any questions. I had been rehearsing how to explain why I had not come earlier. I had been very sick, I would say, with gory details of doctors and medicines. That was almost the truth. I really had not been very sick, but I had been very uncomfortable from being allergic to myself. However, nobody asked, so I did not need to say anything. That evening, Hamid asked, "Walk tomorrow?" I answered, "Yes, walk tomorrow." The morning was especially beautiful, I thought, crisp with a chill in the air. It felt good being out in the jungle again, and I was looking forward to the walk. I made a firm resolve not to have any expectations. Whatever happened would happen. I wanted to have all the wonder as a child has at the beginning of a day. We walked. I was thirsty and very tired. I was sadly out of shape after a month of inactivity. In the early afternoon, the hottest part of the day, when it might be cool in the shade but very humid, we came to a big clump of bamboo about 20 feet ahead. Bamboo tends to bunch together, forming an impenetrable barrier. Hamid stopped, listened, turned to me. I was walking behind him. He motioned, "Be silent." I opened my mouth to ask a question, but he gestured quite firmly, motioning with his hand. "No talking. Stay still. Quiet." We stood frozen for what seemed a long minute, when from the right a large light-colored snake came from under some bushes, slowly crossed in front of us, and passed out of sight into the trees on our left. Snakes, of course, are everywhere. I had learned long ago to watch out for them, which almost always means looking up in the trees. Snakes generally do not crawl on the ground. Large snakes are not common, and a large snake crawling right across the ground was even more unusual. This snake was large, maybe 14 or more feet long. It looked as if it had recently eaten something. It moved slowly and seemed fat through the middle, but it moved determinedly, I thought, as if it had a purpose. I did not try to determine what kind of snake it was or think much about it. I was too curious about how Amid knew that the snake was there. I was certain he could not have heard anything. The snake made no noise that I could detect. I doubt that Amid could have seen it before it moved out into the open, a few feet in front of us. Did he smell it? Not very likely. Then, how did he know? We stayed where we were for a few more minutes, all the time Amid making sure that I did not move or make a noise. Then, when we were ready to resume our walk, he again motioned. Slowly, make no noise, no talking. We turned to our right, walked around the clump of bamboo, and continued on as if nothing happened. Maybe a half an hour after that, we found a good place to sit down. I was mulling over in my mind how he could have known. I asked him, "Did you know that snake was coming?" "Yes," was all he would say. I tried to phrase the question differently. Had he heard it and seen it? No, but he knew. We walked on, my thoughts falling over each other. I returned to the evening when he had introduced us to the Lord of the Great Ocean. That had been a similar mystery. He had seen the ocean, and only the surface of the ocean at that. He probably had not even put his feet in the water, but he had known many things about the ocean that he could not possibly have known. "When we were in Port Dickson, did you walk into the ocean?" I asked. "No," he confessed. He did not get his feet wet. "Is the ocean rainwater?" I questioned him, thinking I could trap him. "Salty," he said. "But how did you know?" I burst out. He smiled, his childlike smile. That night I did not sleep well. I realized that I was almost onto something, but I did not know what. Obviously, Amid knew things about the environment that I might have learned from what other people told me or from what I read in books. I might even have known that snake was coming if I had modern instruments that were more sensitive than my ears, my nose, or my eyes. Was Amid more sensitive? Had he trained his senses to be super sensitive? I had to stay another day, I felt, although my plan was to go back home. I could always leave in the afternoon. The next day, after walking an hour, I realized that I was thinking so much that I did not pay attention to where we were, to what was going on in the environment. I was trying to figure things out in my head, making lists, weighing probabilities as if Amid's talents were a problem in statistics. I decided instead to really open my eyes, my ears, my nose, my skin to whatever I could pick up in the jungle around us. I stopped abruptly. The jungle was suddenly dense with sounds, smells, little puffs of air here and there. I became aware of things I had largely ignored before. It was as if all this time I had been walking with dirty eyeglasses, and then someone washed them off for me, or as if I were watching a blurry home movie and then someone turned the focusing knob. But it was more than that, much more. I could smell things I had no name for. I heard little sounds that could be anything at all. I saw a leaf shivering. I saw a line of insects crawling up a tree. Amid noticed that I had been walking slower and slower while paying intense attention to the world around me. He, too, stood still. "Sit?" he asked. "Well, no, not really. Perhaps. I don't know," I stammered. "Drink?" he asked. Afterwards, I realized that he had spoken very softly so as not to intrude on what was going on inside me, and he had used simple, single words. Sit, drink. Yes, I was very thirsty. I looked at him, thinking he would find a water vine. He said the person who knew the jungle, he was the person who knew the jungle after all. He looked back at me with a perfectly blank expression. He was not helping. He was not talking. Suddenly, a new thought burst in on me. Maybe I could sense water. In my mind, I made a sort of list. Seeing water, hearing water, smelling water. I might smell water or even hear it if it was dripping on a leaf, perhaps. I looked around. Do not talk, Hamid said. I knew what he meant was do not think. Water inside heart, he said next, with a gesture of his hand on his heart. I knew he meant I should sense inside, not with my mind, but from the inside. It is sad to have to use so many words to say something so simple. As soon as I stopped thinking, planning, deciding, analyzing, using my mind, in short, I felt as if I was pushed in a certain direction. I walked a few steps and immediately saw a big leaf with perhaps a half a cup of water in it. I must have stood there for a full minute in awe. Not in awe of anything in particular, simply in awe. When I leaned over to drink from the leaf, I saw water with feathery ripples. I saw a few mosquito larvae wriggling on the surface. I saw the veins of the leaf through the water, some bubbles, a little piece of dirt. I reached out. I put a finger in the water, and then I saw that one of the wriggling mosquito larvae had been trapped in a tiny bubble on my finger. How beautiful! How perfect! I did not put the finger with the water droplet in my mouth, but looked back at the leaf. My perception opened further. I no longer saw water. What I felt with my whole being was a leaf with water in it attached to a plant that grew in soil surrounded by unaccounted other plants, all part of the same blanket of living things covering the soil, which was also part of a larger living skin around the earth. And nothing was separate. All was one, the same thing. Water, leaf, plant, trees, soil, animals, earth, air, sunlight, and the little wisps of wind. The allness was everywhere, and I was part of it. I cannot explain what went on inside of me, but I knew that I had learned something unbelievably wonderful. I felt more alive than I had ever felt before. All of me was filled with being. What this other sense is, I do not know. For me, it is very real. I think of it as a sense of knowing. It probably is a quality we all have to a greater or lesser degree. For me, it works when I can get out of my mind, when I can experience without having to understand or name or position or judge or categorize. It is a quality that has to be used or it fades away. Just as one has to exercise muscles, so too knowing must be exercised. I am saying this after the fact, trying to describe something that does not fit into our Western concepts, and therefore there are no words. At the time, I did not think anything. I was learning how to put my mind aside and use some other sense to know. Standing over a leaf with a little water in it, somewhere in the jungles of Malaysia, I did not think in words. I did not think. I bathed in that overwhelming sense of oneness. I felt as if the light were lit deep inside me. I knew I was radiating something, love perhaps, for this incredible world, this rich, varied, and totally interconnected world of creations that, at the same time, gave love to me. And with the love, I also felt a very deep sense of belonging. After a while, I slowly woke up. I came to, so to speak, and was in my body again. I looked around. Hamid was not where I thought he was. In fact, he was not anywhere in sight. He must have walked on, I thought. And as soon as I thought, I panicked. I realized that I was alone, that Amit had left me in a strange place. I had no idea where I was, or how to get back to 3, or to find Amit. My first reaction was to shout, to yell, and call to him. But the sense of being part of this wonderful whole was so strong that I could not raise my voice. I opened my mouth and tried to make a sound, but no sound would pass my throat. I could not possibly disturb this oneness by yelling, by feeling panicked. I could not be afraid, after all. I was part of all this oneness. My life changed in that moment. And then I knew I need not shout for help. I need not run after Amit. I knew with great certainty that all I had to do was put my mind aside and know where he was. Almost immediately I knew. He was not too far away. I had an impression of him walking leisurely in that direction. He sauntered as if he were deep in thought, or perhaps he was thinking of me. In my mindless state of being, I sent him a voiceless hello, and it was easy to imagine receiving his slight smile that barely stretched the corners of his mouth. Part of me wanted to join Amit, to go back to 3 to eat and drink. But another part wanted to stay here and know this new world more intimately. I stayed. I was certain I would find my way back to Amit and the village later, when it grew dark perhaps. I have no idea how long I stayed. There is no time in that mindless state. But when it was quite dark, that's when I finally returned to the settlement. When it was time to leave the place where I had discovered the leaf with the water. I never drank any water, by the way. I was not thirsty anymore. I extended my knowing to sense where the settlement was. There, my knowing told me to go, and it told me immediately. With my new and now extended knowing, I became aware of a soft sound some distance away. At first, I did not recognize the sound. It seemed familiar, but I had no name for it. And in that state, I avoided naming, understanding, and recognizing. But this sound wanted to be acknowledged. It intruded on my being, almost as if it was introducing itself. I am Tiger. It was that sound between purring and growling that tigers make when they are not sleeping and not hunting. I think of it as an announcement. I am here. All animals that talk have their own words to let the world know. I am here. I felt a whisper of fear, but that was a learned reaction, I knew. From earliest childhood, I have had a special feeling for tigers. What fear I had of them was the fear others had tried to give me. Growing up in Sumatra, I had seen tigers in the wild several times. The first time was when I was perhaps 8 or 9, as we rode in our open-top car. The tiger was in the road in front of us as we came very slowly around a steep hairpin curve. The driver, my friend Undin, stopped the car. He sat calmly in the driver's seat, and I sat beside him. We waited. The tiger certainly must have smelled us. It was night, and the headlights had been on, but Udin switched them off. There was enough moonlight to see clearly. The tiger's tail moved rhythmically from side to side. He stood in the middle of the road, his head turned to look at us. He was large as our car, it seemed. His head was at the same level as ours. I do not know how long we sat there, but it felt as if time were suspended. We looked at the tiger, and he at us for an eternity. Finally, the tiger slowly, very slowly, straightened his head in the direction he had been going and softly stepped back into the jungle at the side of the road. As he moved away, I heard that soft growling purr, and I knew that meant, I am Tiger, I am here. Undin waited a few minutes, turned the lights on again, and drove. He looked at me and said, Ramau, tiger, as if to say, now you know what a tiger is. When I stood alone in another jungle in Malaysia, listening again to that soft, growling purr, I thought of that first tiger. My tiger has arrived. Barley is here. Hold on a moment. When I stood alone in another jungle in Malaysia, listening again to that soft, growling purr, I thought of that first tiger. If I had not been open to the world, I might not have heard the sound at all. It came from far away. Alone this time, I experienced the sound as very comforting. I knew where 3 was, and I knew how to get there. It was not in the direction of the tiger, nor was it away from him. I started walking, still drinking deeply of that wonderful sense of belonging. I was part of this jungle, and the jungle was part of me. The smells, the rich colors now darkening, the sounds of animals were almost overwhelming. The only way I could deal with so much was to feel it as a whole. One, not analyzing, interpreting, naming, sorting, judging. At times I felt as if I did not even walk. I was flowing through this medium that was everything and also myself. Darkness falls quickly in the tropics. It was quite dark before I reached 3. I did not hurry. I knew all the time where Aloud was, to the side and slightly ahead of me, and all the way back to 3, I heard the soft tiger sound traveling with me. I had a fantasy about the tiger sound. First, I thought of it as welcome, as if the tiger were talking to me, rather than simply announcing his presence to the world around him, perhaps a mile away. And then I imagined the tiger saying to me, "You are doing well." I felt he was aware of me, and as I was of him, he walked with me. Before I reached 3, I had a whiff of a smell of the oil used in the lamps the people had lit. Aloud joined me just outside the settlement. Neither of us said anything. We only looked at each other and smiled. I felt my heart swell with pride and gratitude, with accomplishment, and with other feelings I still have no words for. I wish I could recapture the smiles of the Signoi. Their smiles are not like ours. They do not show teeth. Signoi smile with their eyes more than with their lips. Their eyes lit up. Aloud's smile lit up the night as we stepped into the clearing of 3. I was full of my new knowing. I felt such love for these people, my family, as the trees were also my family, and the grass and the scruffy dog that ran between our legs, even the mosquitoes. We were one whole. The night seemed to be particularly rich with sounds that evening, and the sounds, too, were part of all. I listened for the sound of tiger, but he had gone. We ate our meal that someone had cooked, and the food tasted incredibly wonderful. There were roots, I remember, that I had not had before, that tasted like bitter, sweet potatoes. A few wilted, unnamed vegetables tasted like gourmet spinach, and the sugary tea was ambrosia. After the meal, nobody said much, but as I began to be more aware of individual people, I noticed they were watching me. They knew. As people were getting ready to go to sleep, the few dishes that there were had been wiped and put away. The rice pot was washed in a stream and put away. Aloud stood up and asked me whether I was tired. No, I was wide awake. "We walk a little," he said. In the dark, people stay close to home. We moved away only a short distance from where the few huts were. We did not sit down. You are careful where you sit down in the dark. After a long silence, Amid said, So, you found water? Yes, I had found water, and I had found a whole new world, in fact. I opened my mouth to tell him what I had felt and experienced. I wanted to tell him that I was finally learning the marvel of being one with the world, but nothing came out of my mouth. I did not have words to say what I wanted to say in English, let alone in Malay, and certainly not in Signoi. I knew that he knew. There was no need for words. Instead, I reached out my hand and touched his elbow, and we stood like that for some minutes, communicating without saying a word. Finally, he stepped back a little and said, not looking at me, Who brought you back? He did not know how to ask. I had found a way back, but who brought me back? Without hesitation, I said, Tiger, Ramau. I was surprised myself at what I said, but I said it. I realized it was true. It had been that comforting, growling purr of the tiger that had brought me back. Amid nodded and repeated, Haramuru. The Malay word for tiger is harimau, usually pronounced rumau. To say harimaru, it makes it more formal, more important. Nothing more was said, and we drifted back to the little huts. It took me quite a while to come back down after that day. Everything I did was blessed, and things flowed smoothly. Because I had spent so much time away, I had to catch up on my work. There were trips to make, research reports to be written. I spent time with my family. I knew I did everything that was expected of me, everything that I had committed myself to do, and yet I also knew that I was not the same person. I had frequent flashes to what I called oneness, that magical sense of being one with literally everything in creation. And each time I had my oneness experience, it became more natural, more a part of me, not something that I knew, but something I am. A few years earlier, I had spent a summer in Denmark, sailing with 3 Danes. We were in our early 20s. They spoke English for my benefit, except when something needed to be communicated in a hurry, as when we were coming into a harbor, for instance. The captain would yell commands in Danish, and everything would run to do this and that. I felt completely left out. I did not understand a single word that they were saying. My bunk was stuck away in one of the angles of the boat. As I lay awake at night, in my mind I heard Danish, but it was all one blur. In my frustration, I could not distinguish individual words. All I could hear were pure sound, intonation, and rhythm. The next time we came into a harbor, the same thing happened. Much activity, people running around, commands I didn't understand, thrown back and forth in Danish. I hid in the cabin below the deck. When the boat was tied up and they all came down, still excitedly talking Danish amongst themselves, until they saw me, then they switched to English. Suddenly, out of the blue, I blurted out, among other less polite words, Damn it, I cannot understand a word you are saying. I was furious, frustrated, angry, and somehow that anger broke through a bazaar. Suddenly, their speech was no longer a string of weird sounds. I could hear words, expressions. On that day, I began to learn Danish, and a few days later, I had learned enough so that they could send me to a little store and buy supplies. Tomatoes, I remember, whose pronunciation in Danish is particularly strange and difficult. Learning to experience the oneness was very much like learning to hear Danish. I had to break through a veil, a barrier. I forgot Danish because I did not use it, but after having once experienced the oneness, I can find it again, and each time it becomes easier to slip into that way of being. At first, each time I experienced it, I also heard the soft tiger sound, but eventually that faded. I knew the two were separate phenomena. The tiger is with me all the time, and I know that he has always been. It's experiencing the oneness, the knowing, was new. It changed my life. It was at least a month before I had an opportunity to go back to 3. I wanted very much to ask Amid questions to learn how to handle this new knowing. I should have known that Amid did not teach that way. I asked him to explain, but he did not answer. He did not even let me finish my sentence. "Let's walk," he said. We walked. We did not go far before we sat down on a rock. The air smelled wonderful. I took deep breaths, turned my head this way and that, closed my eyes, and again felt the rich oneness all around me. This time, Amid talked. He told a long story about how he had learned that I had just learned when he was a young boy, perhaps 8 or 9 years old. A woman had taught him, a woman from another family, another settlement. She came over for a visit and found him sitting by himself with his eyes closed. She hunkered down beside him, and after a while she asked him what he saw. "Everything, everything," he had answered. She took him to her settlement where he lived with her for many years. During that time, she showed him that there were times when it was good to see everything, but other times when it was not good. Here, Amid looked at me for emphasis. There are times when it is not good to see everything. He told me stories of times when he had seen things before they happened and how frightened he had been at first. He told me stories of strangers who had come to the settlement, who did not know who he was and had talked loud to him. In Malay culture and also in Signoi culture, loud speech, loud noises, as well as strong gestures are considered rude, uncouth, foreign. But he did not mind. He said he just shut off seeing. Again, he turned to me for emphasis. "Do you turn off the seeing?" Yes, I told him I had to. The people around me would not understand, so I had to learn that very early. "Good," he said. Then he added something that I realized only later was very insightful. "You are alone," he said. "It will be difficult for you to see because you do not have the village around you." Here he used the word kampong, suggesting not only a settlement, but especially the extended social relationships of the village, or a Signoi settlement. Now, so many years later, I know what he meant. It is indeed difficult to know without the protection of a village or an extended family. I knew that Amid could not help me after I left Malaysia and continued my life elsewhere, but he had been aware of what it must be like for me. He cared. Amid had been talking for at least half an hour, unusual for him. When he paused, I thought he was done. I moved to stand up, but he put his hand on my arm as if to say no, not yet. Nothing was said for several minutes, but I knew what he was saying to me, not in words, not even in images. I sensed a warm, supporting energy coming from him to me. After a while, he said, turning full face to me, "Strong, be strong." We both got up to stretch and walk around a bit. I knew we would continue, but Amid had finished one part of what he wanted to share with me. We needed to break before going on. He told me some news about 3. Someone had had a baby, but the baby was born too quickly, and so she did not live. Another woman was pregnant. Strange, he said, 2 babies in a row, very unusual. He asked about my family. This was intermission, social time. We chatted about people, about things that had happened, and about daily life. We sat down again, and he continued, in a different tone now, a different tone of voice. It seemed deeper, almost like the voice he had used when he was in a trance. Harimaru, he began, and then paused for a long time. Tiger. For him, he said finally, the animal that helped him was snake. We, Signoi, do not talk about that, he added. We never talk about that. Then he said, snake show itself. Large snakes will not cross a path in broad daylight. The snake we had seen that day had shown itself for Amid's sake and, indirectly, to help me see. I knew he meant to say that the snake had shown itself because snake is the animal that helps him. If he had not been there with me, the snake would not have been there. That knowing is in my heart, he said. The knowledge that snake is his helper is inside him, locked up in his heart. It's his alone. He was sharing something with me that he would not share with anyone else. That evening, after we ate, we walked a little ways so that the others could not hear about the tiger, Hamaru. Now I understood. He meant to tell me that I could not share my feelings for Tiger with anyone. Tiger is the animal that helps me, and that knowing is in my heart. I should not talk about it. I had questions. I wanted to ask why, but I stopped myself in time. I would have to learn by myself. There would be opportunities later to talk, another time, different circumstances. This evening was too full of meaning to spoil it by asking questions. He had not talked during what I thought of as my training. Now he talked, and I would not break the flow. It was very dark outside, and the stars were glittering overhead. There was no moon. He shivered a little, not because he was cold, I think, but because of the solemnity of the moment. At last he turned to face me, relaxing his body as if to say, the ceremony is over. He again said, you are alone. Yes, I was alone with my newfound knowing, without a society or a culture to support me. And then again he added, strong. I thought of a coach telling a player who is walking onto the field, you can do it. This had been my initiation, a solemn occasion. Even though it was not a public event, I felt as if I had been passed on some ancient knowledge. I was intensely grateful for what he had given me, and just as grateful for how he had given it. I learned what learning is. Over the years, my sense of knowing I am part of this world became stronger. It became a lifetime. It made me feel safe. I have a strong connection with trees, and through trees I am connected to all the natural world. Trees have become for me a sort of anchor in the natural world. I am energized by them as other people feel energized by rocks or by the ocean. When I stand with my back pressed up against an old evergreen, I feel its energy coursing up my spine. That is not a mystical experience. It is a way for me to reconnect with the natural world of which I am a part. It is an affirmation of my humanity. I never knew whether I had learned what Amid knew. I am not even certain that what I call knowing is what Amid calls seeing. I do know that Amid helped me regain a sense that being human is being part of the natural world. It is a sense of belonging that all the Signoi and many other people have, but that Western people seem to have lost. Amid knew I lived in a different world, that knowing what he knew would be different for me. He gave me his support and his blessings.